Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time it is, everybody. It's Joan and Gail here, and we are heading into chapter 5, and this is our audio recording for the chapter about wasting time with Jesus. So just our conversation and a few announcements, and then you'll be on your way to reading the chapter and engaging with the practice. But as far as announcements, the only one we really have is just a reminder. Gail and I were just talking that we need to remind people that our last class of the semester is November 19th, and we will do an all-class Zoom again like we did the first week from 9:30 to 11 in the morning. We'll send you out that Zoom link the week before. And you will have some time in your small groups that day. We'll send you out into breakout groups to do that. But we wanted to remind you of it because some of you don't meet on Thursday mornings, but we hope that you can make this work with your work schedule or children's school schedule or whatever. So get that on your calendar now. And we will.
I
Go
just
ahead,
wanted to say, can I add a few? Can I interrupt you there? We'll talk about that after this lesson. No, I just wanted to really encourage each one of you. This is a beautiful time together. We've been meeting in our small groups and not as a large group for good reason. But this time is really special because we take some time to celebrate what God's done and through each one of us during this the study of this book and with one another. So I just kind of want to plant the seeds that if you have sensed God meeting you in a particular way through your group or through the study or through the Psalms and the scriptures, begin to think about what you might want to share, because we usually have a large group, I always say fireside chat, where we get to share what God has done and celebrate together. So I'm just putting a little bug in your ear to start thinking about that as well. Okay, that's all, Joan.
Little commercial by Gail there. That's great. Good reminders for sure. And then we will start again with the second half of the book. As far as we know, that's probably going to be the first week in February. That's generally when we start, and we'll have more details on what that looks like. We don't even know that, so I can't even give you any information, but I'm assuming at least we'll have this, and we'll figure out how that really works as we get a little bit closer. But definitely continue to hold on your calendar the way your small groups have been meeting this semester. So, and we always start with a little piece of our group covenant. And so today, Gail and I picked one towards the bottom there, and it said liberal grace. And once again, a covenant is really just gives us guardrails in our groups that we can come back to if we bump up into them and have a conversation with that person or the group as a whole about how are you doing. So I love that we're kind of coming back to these each time. This one says liberal grace. I will seek to believe the best about each person and what they share and say, while acknowledging that we are all works in progress. So yeah, it is super important. And you could gloss over it real quick and go, oh yeah, I believe that. Yeah, that's not a problem. But what does that, really look like in our groups to really believe the best about each person and what they decide to share? And I think it affects us in our groups. It affects us in all of our relationships. It affects us now, especially I think in the season we're in our country and in our world. And for me, the first thing that kind of came to mind is this needs to be a decision I make even before I get to group. If I'm just kind of talking about my group setting, this needs to be a mindset that I have before I even hit the button to go on my Zoom call. That today I will look around my little, Brady Bunch screen, and I will seek to believe the best about all of God's sisters and brothers that are on that screen, and that what they share, I will still believe the best about them no matter what they share and how they share. Yeah, what else do you want to say about that? And
Well, when we were talking about it earlier, Joan, I think we were trying to think practically, how can we do that in a way that honors the person that you may not fully agree with, or you may not have thought the way they did, but how can you engage in a conversation that's filled with respect and honoring and thinking the best of one another? And so we kind of came up with phrases that, frankly, Joan and I both would say they're worth memorizing because they'll not only come in handy for your group time, but also through the rest of your life when you're dealing with your friends or your spouse or your children in hard conversations. Beginning your statement by saying, "Help me understand," when you may not understand and you need somebody to clarify. Or maybe you ask them or use the words, "I wonder if you've ever thought about it this way." I wonder is just a lovely word because it takes the defense away. It's just another musing about what you might want to say to them. Um, Joan, what are a couple of the other phrases that really are helpful?
yeah, I think another couple are "I'm curious." It's like I wonder, but it takes off that critical spirit that we can sometimes have. And we talked about that a few years ago with a book about curiosity. But I'm curious, what brought you to thinking that or feeling that, or just doing that just kind of softens, and it
Mhm,
says, "I'm listening."
mhm.
Um, or "I haven't already decided something about you." I'm still engaged in the conversation. And the other one we talked about was "I could be wrong, but it sounds like," and then some kind of reflective statement about something you've heard them say, because then that gives them the opportunity to say, um, "Well, yeah, actually, you are wrong. That's not what I'm thinking or feeling or whatever." Or, "Yeah, like that actually is," or "That gives me some words I didn't, have before." So, uh, liberal grace
Yes,
and some really
it's so important.
practical ways to come at that. And I do like that idea of just, I really had to literally memorize and write them down and practice.
Yeah, and practice with your, family. I mean, you
Mhm.
can try that over and over, but literally, if really, I would say pause this, go back and get a pen and pencil and write those phrases down and just try them out, and you'll see how beautiful they are for keeping the conversation open rather than creating a sense of defensiveness or closing a conversation. So,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, it's a good experiment. I think you'll be surprised how well it
yes,
actually goes. Okay, so Gail, you're going to just tell us
yes.
a little bit about the chapter.
Well, as you know, this week our chapter is called Wasting Time Just Being, and it's chapter 5. And again, we're in the practices of disengagement, of going and being alone with God. And if you recall back to one of the Finding Our Rhythm practices, the very first one where we read the book of Luke, Keith Meyer goes back and reflects on that on page 82. I'd like to read a couple paragraphs to you. He says, "My image of Jesus has changed since seeing Luke's portrayal of him taking time away from ministry to enter into extended times of solitude. And my experience in the woods that he reflects on earlier in the chapter has me wondering what Jesus did during those times. Now that I've seen that he was not at the mercy of the crowd's demands and often left them for his own and his disciples' sole care, I no longer buy the Jesus as CEO approach, at least not the driven for results kind so often touted in books on how to lead like Jesus. Were Jesus's times away taken up mainly with planning sessions for his next ministry initiative or preparation of teaching and sermons? Well, my answer has come from examining his teaching. He does not give carefully constructed sermons exegeting Hebrew passages with well-reasoned outlines and points. He would not pass most seminary preaching classes. His teaching is mostly stories, parables, and meditative observations of life, of both nature and people. The 3-point sermons and lessons extracting propositional truths and how to applications that we make out of these seem to miss the whole point. The medium, life itself, was his message. His preparation probably looked a lot like doing nothing other than being present to what was going on around him and noticing how God's rule, his kingdom, was manifested and how to join it. That is such a powerful observation about Jesus. It's so funny how we do talk about him going away so often to be alone, but it is an interesting thought to imagine what exactly did he do when he was alone with the Father, and what was he about, and to realize that he was about just being with the Father with no agenda, with being attentive to him. So it leads us to the question on page 83, where he says, what did Jesus's rhythms of being with the Father look like? And how might they relate to our own and to our life situation? What does ours personally look like? So I don't know, Joan, if you have any other thoughts about what Jesus's time alone might have looked like. And then just reflect for us for a moment what your time pulling away to just waste time with God might look like in your life right now.
I think what I heard and, what we read in the Gospels, it was pulled out there, but it was just very ordinary. And it was just very much the places and ordinary objects and things around him. It wasn't like he went on vacation. It was, the the dirt road or the stones or whatever it was. And so I was thinking about in my own life, like when I'm just wasting time with him,
Mhm.
it's simple things like sitting on a chair on my patio watching the birds on the feeder or on my walk. I'm a pretty big walker, at least definitely during COVID. And like right now, it's like rustling through the leaves on the road up to my main path, and like it's no agenda. It's paying attention to things on my walk. Like I just noticed the other day one of those fuzzy caterpillars. It was bright yellow, and watching it, like I watched it cross like a good part of the road. I don't do this well all the time, but when I do, I remember that. Like I remember that caterpillar from a month ago, and I remember the rustling of the leaves, or when I've stopped along the path too. There was some little girls selling rocks the other day. They're just plain old rocks with smiley faces on it. And I remember thinking, I don't have time to stop. But then I did. And like that little rock means a lot to me on my dresser. So it was just ordinary.
Mhm.
What about you, Gail?
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I just started thinking about Jesus just sitting on a mountainside, sitting probably on a big rock and looking out over the city or just over the expanse before him, and just being attentive to God. Was actually very I mean, it just felt life-giving. Like
Mhm.
it's okay to do that, because out of that space comes something beautiful. And I so resonate with what you're saying. And I mean, I think there are certain rhythms that I put in place to try to create that space. I don't always do it well or perfectly, but I have learned that going to the same place over and over actually helps me get to that place of just being with God sooner.
Mhm.
Um, I have a room in my house that looks out over my front yard and the side yard, and actually a big old oak tree right near it. And I love the time when I go in there to just sit. And I look out of that window and I watch how I was just telling Joan before we started this that um, this is a rhythm of watching that oak tree every fall, because it has a big old knot hole in it. And I get to watch as the little squirrel couple that lives there begins to prepare it for winter. And so I sat there probably 30 minutes this morning watching them go in and out with leaves and branches and running into each other as they're trying to do it, and finding such deep pleasure in the ways of God, and remembering he also is a God of rhythm, and rhythms restore us. So finding those places to be just alone, to waste time with him, are really important.
Mhm. Okay, so let's move on to there's another paragraph on page 85, the second paragraph. I'm just going to read it. It says, if we will not take time to shut down every once in a while and let our bodies, minds, and souls just be, our bodies will rebel and shut down another way. There are records of leaders caught up in the unrelenting stress of their plans and conquests being suddenly struck by days of unexplained stupor. Their subordinates become unglued by the sudden change from brilliant and steady as a rock leadership to a fearful puddle of tears or a dazed and confused stare. But King David's example in Psalm 131 shows us that we don't have to wait until we tilt to begin to practice downtime and the restorative power of doing nothing. We can learn to practice doing nothing regularly. And I love that last sentence. We can learn to practice doing nothing regularly. And I think that's the invitation, that this is actually a practice to pull away and just be with our Father in this way. And so I think the question here, and you and I probably alluded to it a little bit, Gail, is like we talked about how we go about doing that, but what have we been learning about ourselves, or about why we need this, or really even about God, um, as we do, waste time and pull away.
Mm. A couple things. I think the thing I've learned most about God is um, how delighted he is to be with me with no agenda. At first, I felt guilty, like I should come with an agenda. Years ago, when I first started this, I felt like I should have some kind of agenda, spiritual agenda, things to read in the Bible, or I need to journal and come up with, something deep out of this time of wasting time with God. And what I have um, really experienced is that I found great delight. I felt his delight in me for just coming to be with him. And what it showed me about myself is how easy it is for me to get wrapped up in uh, my own agendas and other people's agendas for me, and thinking that I must tend to those first before I do that, rather than like Jesus did, just pull away when it was time for soul care,
Mhm.
and to be okay with that space, knowing that that's how I am created. I am created to come away and be still with him. So it's taught me to, really maybe examine myself a little bit, the contrast of my daily life. How intense have I become? How much of my life is hurry, or I ought to be doing this or should be doing that. And when I go away to be with God, it really, the contrast becomes so clear to me. Um, and I know that I hear the call, I hear the invitation to just go and come and rest and be present with him. How
Mhm.
about you, Joan?
I I can identify really with all of that. I think the words that came to mind as I thought about it was just learning to really be, what does it mean to be attentive? I think I know that in my mind, but what does that really look like in my heart and in my body? I think there's an invitation there to also just to
Yeah.
wake up to what's important, wake up to what God is doing, wake up to the world around me, and not be so self-centered. um, it made me think of Mary Oliver has this short little quote. I think it's called, what, you'll know this, Gail, a rule of life or something, how to live a life, I think it's called. And it's simply, pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it.
Mhm.
And I think that has a lot to do with wasting time with God, is
Yes.
me paying attention, being attentive, waking up to the little things that he puts in front of us, and be astonished about them in a new way, and then tell about it, journal about it, be grateful to God for putting that in your life, be grateful for what that tells you about his character. Anyway, so it's so funny, like just
Yeah.
wasting time, which can feel like nothingness because there's no productivity, can actually have just really beautiful fruit that can come from it.
And listening, it
Mm.
teaches you how to listen in a new
Yeah.
way, a deeper way, that translates into our lives, where we're able to listen to the Spirit of God within us doing our daily routines and listen to one another differently. I find that if I stay in my rhythm of coming away and being quiet with God, when I do enter into my everydayness, I am more attentive and less irritable, or less prone to cut somebody off or not
Mhm.
listen to them. So there's, in the, like you said, in that wasting time, God meets us in such beautiful ways that
Mhm.
impact the rest of our life. So
Mhm.
this chapter is really important, and I told Joan there's just a lovely story in here that I really would love for you to make a point of reading this chapter, because there's a lovely story in here about a little lizard that I think just gives an image, such a good image, for us to hold on to. But as we close our conversation, um, Joan and I are just going to read the last couple of paragraphs on page 88, and then we'll comment on the homework, our Finding Our Rhythm practice that he suggests, and then we'll close in prayer. But the first paragraph says this in summary: my practice of doing nothing, of wasting time with God, often serves to help me be more aware of how driven I am by the tyranny of my agendas. Days of doing nothing are restorative in that we lay down our agendas, our self important projects, and in the loss of our will, we become more ready to do His will, and often that is serving him in a very ordinary thing done for another.
Please understand, I believe Jesus had very busy and full days, just as we often do. But besides working hard and long hours for days on end, I think Jesus had a practice of doing nothing as well. The one who took time to watch birds and flowers also took time to watch ordinary life and the people who inhabited it. His parables are largely the result, in my opinion, of great quantities of time doing nothing but being with God's creation. He had a rhythm of doing nothing often and long enough that he was able to do great things according to the Father's agenda, noticing and loving those who happened to be around him. So that's just a snapshot of the chapter. The homework, the practice that he calls Finding Our Rhythm on page 89 is taking a day to do nothing. So, frame that up however works for you, whether it's a day or half a day or, an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon. But make it a large enough chunk of time that you kind of really get to experience this practice.
He
Um,
also gives you some suggestions, and I kind of chuckle because the first one is go golfing. You can tell he's a golfer, but please do if you are as well. But I think the last three suggestions he gives, all of which are lovely, and it doesn't always mean that you are just sitting in a room by yourself, but it may be being out in a park, or
mhm.
just people watching in silence and watching their movements and observing them, or being with a child who actually knows better than we do about wasting time in a beautiful way. So hopefully that is that time you spend, half a day or a day, um, really gives you a chance to taste and see how good the Lord is. So your homework is to read the chapter. Obviously, if you're hearing this, you're listening to the audio about the chapter. And the audio meditation is also in your email. And plan out now to practice, have a day set aside or half a day set aside to actually practice this rhythm of being with God, wasting time with God. So, do you want to close us in a prayer, Joan?
Sure. Father in heaven, Lord, thanks that you're a God who loves us so much and you desire for us. You actually delight when we say, yes, I want to come spend time with you, essentially doing nothing, Lord. And not only do you meet us in that place, but then you give us fruit out of that place for us to savor along the journey for the other days where we're not maybe able to pull away in this way. So, Lord, let us learn to pay attention, to be attentive, to learn to wrestle through maybe the hard parts of this, Lord, and teach us along the way what it means to be your beloved sons and daughters because we have been together in your company. And we just ask all this in your very precious name. Amen.
Amen.
Have a good week, everybody.